In our next segment, Points North's Ann Barbano talks to Senator Tom Crowley in the first of a recurring series of Vermont Snapshots.
1967 was the year Tom Crowley would begin his very public political career as a Chittenden County State Senator, later to serve as Dean of the Senate. Crowley made his mark as chairman of the powerful Senate Transportation Committee, overseeing both the state police and the Department of Motor Vehicles. By 1991, he was out of office after 2 driving while intoxicated arrests and a battle with alcohol. Tom recently sat down with me to discuss his time in the Senate and how alcohol played such a pivotal role in his life.
Tom, you're sitting in the same state Senate chamber you sat in for 24 years as a Chittenden County State Senator.
Mm-hmm.
What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
When I come back here,
Mm-hmm.
a longing to be a senator. I sat where you're sitting for 24 years, and I miss it. So that's the first thing that goes through my mind, is I would like to change seats with Senator Jack Berry, who now sits in number 12 seat, where I sat for so long.
Give me a description of the people in the Senate. Who were they?
Well, there were very few women. There were a lot of elderly gentlemen, gentlemen who had been involved in the state Senate, in politics in the House of Representatives, and then later to the Senate. I was 30 years old when I was elected, and you had to be 30 to run for the Senate in those days. And I think I brought the average age down to like 60. So they were not a bunch of screaming rompers, I can tell you. And for the first 2 or 3 months, whenever I wore a green jacket, they used to hand me notes. Thought I was a page boy, but it just, after a while, it got caught on, and then before I knew it, I was Dean of the Senate. Had been here the longest of anybody else.
You were an alcoholic at the time you sponsored Project
Crash. Yes, I was an active alcoholic. I was drinking every day, and most of my colleagues in the General Assembly and in the administration were drinking every day. Probably no one as much as I was, but I was drinking out of control, and I just didn't think that I had a problem. But it's ironic that I would sponsor the alcohol rehabilitation program, and I did it selfishly, because under the old statutes with DWI in Vermont, your first offense, you lost your license for a year. Your second offense, you lost it for 3 years, and your third offense, you lost it for life. End of story, unless you could get a gubernatorial pardon. And I selfishly said, because Project Crash gave you 90 days instead of a year, and gave you 2 years instead of 3 years, and then you never lose it for life. There's always a chance with rehabilitation and so on, you might get your license back. I thought that was a good deal. So I was more than happy to sponsor it, and it was helpful that I did, because I was chairing the Transportation Committee, which in effect dealt with all the law enforcement agencies. So I had a whole ton of folks who were enabling me to let me drink continually out of control. The first bill I put in was a bill that distinguished yellow, red, and blue lights, what agency was what. I used to be terrified when I would drive back from Montpelier and see a red light up on the interstate. And in those days, it could belong to a fire truck, to an ambulance, to a police car, to a snowplow. So I put a bill in that mandated that all law enforcement had blue lights, all the other emergency vehicles had red lights, and all service vehicles, snowplows, wreckers, and so on, had yellow lights. So then when I drove from Montpelier to Burlington, after having drank quite a lot, if I saw a red light, I'd say, well, chances are the cops aren't around.
How was it possible to be an effective senator while being under the influence of alcohol?
Well, because you weren't drunk during the day, for starters. And a lot of the camaraderie and social activities that went with being a senator and the use of alcohol were very, very compatible to one another. A lot of important things got done over a few drinks at the horse room here in Montpelier, I can tell you that.
The DWI, Can you go back and tell me what happened?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was seeing a lady friend who lived in Georgia, Vermont, and it was a very dark, rainy night. I'd had a lot to drink, and I got mixed up near where her residence was, and I went to turn my car around, and I backed up onto the lawn of a investigator for the state attorney's office in Chittenden, and I got stuck. So I had to go to the door to ask him to call a tow truck, and he recognized me and felt, I guess, that I was too impaired to drive, so he called the state police. And I felt sorry for the poor trooper. It was a rookie state cop out of the St. Albans barracks, and you know, it wasn't anything he could do. I mean, an assistant investigator for the state attorney's office had made a complaint and had called the police, so I was the guy, and away I went back to the St. Albans barracks and took the test and promptly flunked it. And but I still was not in a position to think that I had a problem or that I was going to stop drinking. I went in and pleaded nolo and paid a good stiff fine and went to crash, flunked the course.
Were you embarrassed? Were you angry?
Of course I was embarrassed. It was terrible. But I kept smiling and put up a big front and walked for 90 days. Didn't have to walk really because I was in a position to have a driver, and so much for that. And I just continued to keep up my habit of drinking daily, and what do you know, I got nailed again. And then a couple years later, and I might add that I was easily reelected shortly after that first DWI. I was very nervous about that. So then I said to myself, gee, I got more votes this time than I did the 2 previous years, so I got to be infallible. So it certainly didn't slow me down or even give me second thoughts on the amount of my usage of alcohol. A couple years later, I went into a state liquor store to buy liquor, and the clerk behind the counter felt that I was too intoxicated to be buying liquor. And he knew that I had driven there, so he called the Winooski police, and they promptly met me when I turned the ignition key on in my car. And away we went, and a week-long trial, and slow news week, and front page every day, and channels 3, 4, 5 covering it, the Rutland Herald special reporter up here. But it wasn't until Judge Mahaney put me in jail did I realize that I had a problem. That was my bottom, right then and there, you know, Thanksgiving Day, 1989. I said, T, you can't drink.
Tom, as you look back at those 24 years, are you proud?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was just so much fun, and you can do so much to help so many people, most of them not in a position to get any help. And it made no difference to me whether it was the president of Blodgett Oven Company or a lady who had missed her welfare check. When they called, if there was something I could do to help them, I did. A lot of folks called about motor vehicle department problems. No license, or license plates were late, or wrong address, or whatever. And it was easy to fix. You just didn't tell your constituents that. And I love to help people. I still do. It gives me great personal satisfaction. So I look back very, very fondly at 24 years sitting in the chair you're sitting in. And, you know, get the feeling in the pit of your tummy that you'd like to be back someday. But who knows?